meeting of the members to explain to the members the process the BHA followed to select a contractor to rebuild the wildlife overlook. Mr. Lambert indicated that many members did not understand how we selected a contractor that cost us $300,000 plus, rather than a contractor that would have cost us $100,000. We understand completely how that would be difficult for others to understand. Therefore, we, the board, decided to honor that request and call this meeting to explain to our members the process we followed and give them an opportunity to ask questions if they choose. Let me introduce the others who are here today. Carrie Moffett, our executive director, the members of the board of directors, John Kinney, our vice president and a director, Robert Drumheller, our secretary treasurer and a director, Tiffany Williams, a director, Jennifer Lucas, a director, John Fisher, our immediate past president and a director. Now let me explain mechanically how this will generally work. I will go through a basic explanation of the background creating the need to replace the overlook and the process we followed to select the contractor to rebuild the overlook. After I complete my presentation and answer the two questions that were submitted to us in advance by members, there will be time for you to ask me or any of the directors any questions you may have about the process we followed to select the contractor for the overlook. We will not be using the chat feature for today's webinar, but if you have a question during the presentation, you may raise your hand and we will call on you after I finish the formal presentation. With that introduction, let me get into the background of the wildlife overlook. The wildlife overlook was constructed in 2001 and has served thousands of visitors each year who come to observe wildlife in their natural habitat throughout the year. In early 2018, the Bald Head Association became aware of unnatural behavior by alligators at the overlook and asked the BHA Conservancy, the Village Public Safety Department, and the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission for help in determining how best to secure the area. In early 2018, John Henry Harrelson, a wildlife biologist with the NCWRC, performed some basic tests to assess the behavior of alligators at the overlook. Two alligators at the overlook approached WRC, BHA, and BHI Conservancy staff who were standing on the observation deck. Mr. Harrelson stated at the time this was unnatural behavior and most likely a learned behavior that came from humans feeding them. They recommended at the time that we shore up the railings and consider updating the signage at the overlook. Protective fencing was installed in June 2018 based on that advice. In September 2018, as I'm sure you all remember, Hurricane Florence destroyed the overlook. In January 2019, just after our annual meeting, with close to 50 owners remaining, a vote was taken as to whether or not they wanted us to rebuild the overlook. 100% voted to rebuild the overlook. So thereafter, we directed our attention to rebuilding the overlook. John Fisher was elected as our president in January of 2019. John personally took charge of and committed his time and efforts to this important project. The first step John took was to select an architect to design the new overlook. Peter Quinn, one of the most experienced architects on the island and a consultant to our ARC, referred us to Gordon Hall. Mr. Hall is a seasoned and well-regarded architect located in Wilmington who has much experience on Bald Head Island. By May 2019, Gordon had a drawing for a new overlook and presented it to the Bald Head Association Board of Directors, who approved it. John Fisher then went to a number of our local experienced contractors, met with them, showed them the drawing Gordon had prepared, and asked them, would they be able to rebuild the overlook? Many assured John they would. Throughout the spring and summer, John Fisher, at each meeting of the board, would update the board of the actions he was taking. By August, John had identified 2 contractors who were able to begin work right away, Dale Guerra and Wayne Crone. John came to the board and explained the steps he had taken and said he believed going forward with Dale and Wayne Crone working together made sense, and the board agreed. John also indicated at that time, from a safety point of view, it made sense to remove what remained of the damaged overlook, and he had estimates from these contractors as to the cost of doing that work. In September of 2019, John got them started working and authorized a first draw. Then, at the end of September, we received a complaint from Joyce Hatley on behalf of Wayne Lambert. Mr. Lambert indicated he had not had an opportunity to bid and wanted it. John Fisher assured us he had invited Mr. Lambert to bid, but John did not receive a bid from him. There was a dispute and the board got involved. Wayne Lambert was and is exceptionally important to the Bald Head Association. He built the original overlook in 2001 at his cost and maintained it at his cost thereafter. He has maintained BHA's community garden at his cost for years. In early 2018, he had expressed to BHA his desire to rebuild it when it was rebuilt. Because the board was very appreciative of all Mr. Lambert had done, and because it believed there was some merit in his complaint, and rather than trying to decide who was right or wrong in this dispute, the work that was being done by Dale Guerra and Wayne Crone was stopped, and the initial draw was refunded. We, the board, then moved from the informal procedure we had been following in the effort to get the overlook rebuilt and moved to a more formal and classical process, and one in which the board became more involved. John Fisher continued to lead us for the work on the wildlife overlook in this more formal process. On November 9th, 2019, the board met with Gordon Hall and the more formal process got underway. The board interviewed Mr. Hall and was very satisfied he was the right architect to go forward on this important project. At our January 2020 board meeting, Gordon Hall appeared and afterwards presented the standard American Institute of Architects contract with all the detail filled out consistent with what we had explained we wanted. He explained there would be a need for a structural engineer. The contract specified that safety will be paramount with regard to design solutions, as the board had indicated to Gordon was our desire. Gordon brought with him to the meeting photographs of other wildlife overlooks he had visited or reviewed in order to inform and educate himself regarding the design of a wildlife overlook. Thereafter, work got underway. Carrie Moffett worked with the village manager, Chris McCall, to reach a written agreement regarding right-of-way issues for the village. From January to May 2020, Gordon worked on preparing the drawings and specifications. He selected Chris Holmes as the structural engineer, and Mr. Holmes prepared the structural engineering portions of the plans and specifications. Gordon Hall prepared the architectural portion of the drawings and specifications. Then, in March 2020, the pandemic entered the picture and slowed progress a bit. By the end of May 2020, all the plans and specifications were finalized, and on June 3rd, 2020, Carrie Moffett presented to 12 contractors a formal request for proposals. I'd like to now show you that request for proposals. If Carrie, if you'd be kind enough to cause that to be projected, or Pam. I think you now have in front of you the request for proposal. It was a somewhat detailed request that spelled out the project overview, the background, the scope of the work. And then on the second page, set out in great detail the specific requirements that we were interested in. At the June 12th, 2020, and this was on June 3rd, that Carrie got to these 12 contractors and submitted this request for proposal, and along with it with the plans and specifications. At the June 12th, 2020 board meeting of the BHA, Carrie reported that most of the contractors were interested, but nearly all stated they were too busy to take on another project and could not provide a bid in that short period of time. No bids were received by the board by the meeting on June 12th, but several contractors indicated they could provide a bid in the next 10 to 15 days. As most of you, I'm sure, know, the board of directors for the Bald Head Association meets monthly. The next board meeting was on July 10th, 2020. By then, 3 contractors had submitted bids. B&B Design and Construction from Southport submitted a bid for $468,911. Parker Group from Wrightsville Beach submitted a bid for $720,000. Wayne Lambert from Bald Head Island submitted a bid for $144,000, which Mr. Lambert offered by gift to reduce it to $100,760. We discussed all 3 bids. We were concerned about the great disparity between the high bid of $720,000 and the low bid of $100,760. We understood the gift component of the lower bid, but even with that, there was a significant difference in price. We were concerned about price and obviously wanted the lowest price, but our priority still remained for the safety of our members, their families, guests, and all visitors. We felt the significant price difference between the lowest and the highest bid, at the very least, raised a red flag. We did not know accepting a bid far below what appeared to be the average and looked like a bargain would not in the end prove to be a bargain. We felt we needed to look into it further. We did not want to enter into a contract that in the end would jeopardize the safety of our members, their families, or guests, or anyone. However, at the June 10th, 2020 meeting, we passed a motion to select Wayne Lambert conditionally as the contractor for the overlook. The key condition we had was that we wanted our architect, who was our consulting architect for construction, to meet with Mr. Lambert and satisfy himself and have a reasonable, realistic belief that the contract conditions can be satisfied if we go forward with Mr. Lambert. We asked Gordon Hall to meet with Mr. Lambert and thereafter advise us whether or not this bid was one in which we should have confidence. Should we have confidence Mr. Lambert would fulfill the work specified in the plans and specifications? Would we be justified in accepting the bid? Between the July 10th, 2020 meeting and the August 14th, 2020 meeting, 2 things stand out as significant. Number one, we received 3 more bids. Gary F. Hewitt, Supply, North Carolina, for $328,000. Projects Works for $518,000. And Trinity Builders for $297,000. On July 16th, the second significant issue occurrence was that on July 16th, our architect, Gordon Hall, and Carrie Moffett, our executive director, had an extensive meeting with Wayne Lambert to permit Gordon to be in a position to advise the board whether or not he had confidence in Mr. Lambert to build the overlook in conformity with the plans and specifications. The next BHA board meeting was on August 14th. Gordon Hall was there by Zoom, and there were 5 directors present. Gordon spoke at length about the meeting with Wayne Lambert. We questioned him. I specifically questioned him at length as to whether or not he had confidence that Mr. Lambert would complete the work in accordance with the plans and specifications. Mr. Hall had concerns, and he discussed those concerns with us at great length. All 5 directors then discussed among themselves the questions of whether or not we wanted to go forward with Wayne Lambert and whether or not we had confidence in him to perform the work in accordance with the plans and specifications. The question first considered by the board was whether or not the conditions attached to the motion on July 10th to approve Mr. Lambert as the contractor for the overlook had been met. 3 of the board members had had personal experiences with Mr. Lambert, and they spoke at length about their experiences. In reliance on what our expert advised us, and based on what the 3 directors who had experience with him stated, we individually and collectively concluded we did not have confidence in Mr. Lambert, and therefore the conditions on the action taken on July 10th, conditionally approving him, were not met. We then discussed at length the contractor with the next lowest bid, Trinity. Several of the directors were familiar with Trinity and reported favorably on them. We had positive information and no negative information and no red flags with regard to Trinity. A motion was then made to approve Trinity as the contractor to receive the contract to build the overlook for us, and the motion was unanimously approved. That completes my review of the process we followed to select a contractor to build the overlook. Now we will move to the questions phase, where you can ask us any questions you like about the process we followed to select a contractor to rebuild the wildlife overlook. As I indicated earlier, we had invited members who had questions to submit those questions to us in writing in advance of the meeting. I received 2 questions. I'll read the question to you and then answer that question. The first written question I received was from Richard Kane. Here is his question. Question for May 4th meeting. At any time, consideration of potential contractors for construction of the scenic overlook, and when the contract was awarded to Trinity Design, did any member of the Board of Association have an interest in the property leased by Trinity on Edward Teach? If so, please identify the board members. And Richard Kane is our member who submitted that. And our answer to that question is yes. The real property that is leased by Trinity Builders is owned jointly by John Fisher and Tiffany Williams. The second written question I received was from Judy Bronner. And she stated, I hope you will speak to the following at Tuesday's meeting. Please explain how and why the board interpreted the general membership approval to restore the overlook to mean approval for the creation of a significantly larger and expansive and expensive unfunded project. If the membership had been given the opportunity to weigh in via a vote during your deliberation process, the outcome may well have been quite different. And our answer to that is, in January 2019, at the end of the annual meeting, the nearly 50 members attending were asked if they wanted to rebuild the overlook or not. 100% voted to rebuild. This was not a vote to approve any specific contract for rebuilding or to approve any specific costs for rebuilding. It was a vote to get the pulse of the members, the general feel of the members regarding whether or not to rebuild the overlook. Whether or not members are required to approve any particular improvement that will result in an assessment to the members is decided by our covenants. If the assessment is over $250, then specific approval of the members is required. If it is less than $250, no vote by or approval of the members is required. This is within the specified responsibility of the board. Here, the assessment was $240, which is less than $250, and therefore no approval by the members was necessary or required. It was a board decision, and the board made the decision. Judy Bronner also stated in her letter, additionally, there is the perception of conflict of interest in the selection of the contractor. Judy, I presume you are referring to the fact I discussed above, that Trinity Builders leases real property in a building owned jointly by John Fisher and Tiffany Williams. I can understand how some might think this constitutes a conflict of interest. Regardless of how it might be perceived by some, it is my understanding that under North Carolina law, this does not constitute a conflict of interest because neither board member nor any entity of which they were an owner had any direct financial interest in the Wildlife Overlook contract. Accordingly, neither John nor Tiffany were required to remove themselves from the discussions or voting on this issue. That completes the answers to the written questions I received. Now let me explain the procedure for asking questions. Here are the instructions for those who have questions. Number one, for those who are joining us online, click on the raise your hand icon on the bottom of the Zoom panel to be placed in the queue to speak. When it's your turn, Pam Henson of our staff will announce your name and ask you to unmute yourself. After your question comment, ensure that you have restored your mute setting. For those attending via phone call, raise your hand for a question by clicking *9 on your phone keypad. Unmute your phone by clicking *6 on your phone keypad when asked to do so. Revert back to mute on your phone by clicking *6 on your phone keypad. Okay, we may proceed with questions.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So I see one hand raised. So what I'll do is say your name, and if you would also say your full name and state your Bald Head Island address, and then I will allow you to speak. And right now I see Scott Thomas, and I will say allow to talk, and then you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Scott. Please go ahead.
Outstanding. Yeah, I'm Scott Thomas. I live at 5 Palm Court if anybody wants to come by and throw stones at my house later or whatever. But Alan, thank you guys all for having this call. You know, it's really important to have this call. And I was worried after the last time we had a call that we wouldn't get a chance to have this and discuss, you know, out loud, you know, what some of the concerns were. And I hate it because I know you guys are tasked with something very difficult around getting consensus. And so I guess I had maybe 3 quick questions that I was hoping that the board would consider. And it's less related to this individual instance of the wildlife overlook, but maybe something to consider for going forward so that we don't end up in a position similar to what we are right now, where everybody's feeling, you know, a little frustrated, you know, maybe with where we were. The first one that I would ask you all to consider is, would you consider implementing some kind of selection guidelines when you're going to make some kind of purchase? You know, I'm real familiar with in the government contracting space, much like you put up there the scope of the bid. It also usually says what the selection criteria are that will be used to evaluate the person that ultimately wins the bid. If you even look at last month's Village Voice, for instance, they talk about they're getting ready to expand the island postage services. And they even noted in that update to the village that lowest price will be the factor that they consider for selection. And I think had we had that here, it probably would have cut down on some of the angst amongst everybody, because it would have been clear what the selection were. You know, Alan, I know I reached out to you. I had a little bit of shock. I thought, you know, whatever it ended up being, $350,000 seemed like a lot for, you know, the overlook. And so I had some concerns over it. But, you know, had you, you know, maybe listed at the outset, you know, Gordon's, you know, participation in that or whatever that might be, it might have put members at ease that it was done the right way. So that would be one.
All right, Scott, let me take these answers one at a time, because my memory is not good to hold 3 questions.
Yeah.
Your first question is very good. It's as much a informational, helpful guideline for us to do things better, and we're always happy to receive those and weave them in our future work. I thank you for it, Scott.
No problem. Well, I don't want to be one of those people that gripes and doesn't give a constructive solution. You know, so
we appreciate it.
The second thing that I'd ask you guys to consider, and maybe membership should consider it, is, and I want to point out, I think you're right. the authority that y'all exercised is well within the bylaws, right? You don't need the membership approval to do a special assessment up to $250.
That is
But I guess
correct.
I would consider, is this one of those times where just because you can doesn't maybe mean you should, right? And maybe consider what that threshold is. And so I guess the ask would be, maybe the board should consider lowering what that threshold is for special assessments. Because I think when I read the bylaws, it actually says it could either be up to 10% of the general fund or $250 per household, whichever was greater. Maybe we just lower that, right? And then we wouldn't get to this point where we're griping about it after the fact. You know, if we said, look, anything more than, you know, I don't know the right number, but pick a number, $100 per, member for a special assessment would have required us to have this conversation before we made the decision rather than second guessing it after the fact. And I know that might be a weird thing to suggest, but that I think would have avoided all of this, is if we, would have had lower thresholds around that, because it would have forced us to have more communication as a membership, and it would have caused people to be more involved in the decision-making process.
Okay, Scott, thank you for, again, that's a good suggestion, something we will consider. In the normal and ordinary course, we, at the end of each year, consider whatever changes we want to make to design guidelines, to bylaws, to covenants are a little more complicated, but we look at all of it. And so we'll put your good thoughts in the list for the consideration this year.
Great. And then I guess the third one, you've already touched on it. I think there was some, concern or reservations around, was there some kind of conflict of interest? And something that we've always employed where I've worked is anybody that was in a purchasing decision, right? Or making some kind of purchasing decision, before we made that decision, we always ask people to do a disclosure of any kind of personal, financial or familial relationships, so that we made sure, there wasn't even an appearance that any of that crept in. And it might be, a worthwhile thing to do as well, because, the reality is, guys, we're a really small island, right? Everybody's gonna know somebody somehow, right? But I think, just being, very forthright with that at the outset, and then as a group looking at that and saying, should somebody, sort of recuse themselves or just acknowledge it at the outset, might have helped, stem down some of that emotion around, whether or not that was appropriate.
Very, very good suggestion. We like that and like them all. And I do appreciate your taking the time to make helpful suggestions to us, Scott. Thank you for your participation.
To get the wildlife outlook back, guys, we've missed it. My kids loved it. And so I want everybody to be excited about it and happy about it. And I hate that it was a source of acrimony for everybody, but hopefully we get better for it. And the next thing we buy is smooth as silk, whatever we do for the homeowners.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. We appreciate your attending and your helpful suggestions.
Take care, y'all.
All right, thank you so much. And let's see, let's make sure you are muted back. Thank you, Scott. So I see a hand raised here for Sandy Kades, and please help if I have mispronounced your name. And again, we are trying to limit questions and comments to 3 minutes. So we are timing and want to make sure we have enough time for everyone to speak. So now I will say allowed to talk. And if you will unmute yourself, Sandy, and then we'll listen to your question or comment.
It's Kades, Pam, but thanks for checking. This is kind of a follow-up to Scott's, I think, because he mentioned the process of picking the contractor and the amount of assessment. I was wondering if it ever occurred to anyone, because I think this is the other controversial point. Did it ever occur to the board that perhaps the architectural drawings, the proposed plan, maybe should have been presented to the members? Because I think the size and scope, once it came out, kind of set everyone back to like, what? That is huge, and it's a much bigger impact on the island than the tiny one we're used to, and I understand there may be reasons for it, but it might have been good to include the membership in what it was going to look like. because I think that's something that just brought out a lot of negativity on the project. And I too appreciate you guys are in a tough position having to do all this, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't include us more in the process. That's all.
That's very helpful, Sandy. All good comments. There's no question it would have been nice to have avoided this acrimony, and your suggestion could have helped in that process. And I thank you for it, and thank you for your participation.
Thanks for what you guys do.
Are there any additional questions people have? Okay.
Pam Henson, you might be muted.
Okay, so let's see, Paula Burger, and we'll start the 3-minute clock. And Paula, if you could introduce yourself and give us your Bald Head Island address, please.
Right. My name is Paula Burger. We have a property at 5 Morning Warbler Trail. We've been residents since, not full-time residents, but we've owned property here since 1987. My question is this: among the guidelines given to the architect, were similar guidelines about vegetation that we follow through the Architectural Review Committee? Were those similar guidelines given to the architect? It seems to me that one of the sort of startling things, in addition to the scope of the project, is how much vegetation has been cleared in order to facilitate the construction. And all governed by serious constraints on how much we can take down, of what size limb, et cetera. And I wondered if similar guidelines were offered to the, were proffered to the architect.
Let me inquire who is the best person here to answer that. Give me just a second. Let me have John Fisher will be answering this question.
Okay, this is John Fisher, and I thank you for that question. It's a very good question. We're all very concerned about the conservation preservation, of course, of our forest and our understory, et cetera, around this island, and it's always been near and dear to us. First, let me just mention the fact that each of you are quite aware of the Duke Energy projects that are going on across the island right now. The initial vegetation removal, and some of that started and began when Duke Energy came in. There's a large transformer and 2 additional side pieces of equipment on that property that literally is on right of way of the village area, et cetera. So that vegetation had to be cut back, pulled out, and some of it removed for Duke to do its work. When we entertained the rebuild of the wildlife overlook and determined the access to get the old pilings out, the new pilings in, and meet the specifications that were required and engineered for us with this particular project, it required large equipment to get in there. I was appointed to help with that overlook site along with John Kinney. We both serve on this board, and we were both very concerned about that. The removal of the trees and the vegetation certainly, again, as I mentioned, are concern to us. We knew we had to remove that, pull it out to get the proper equipment in to place these pilings. These pilings aren't just 3, 4, 5 feet in the ground. They're 8+ feet in the ground. And you can't do that with small equipment or hand equipment. So that vegetation was properly discussed, tagged, looked at, and we were on site and oversight with that, the entire project. Once we pulled that out and were able to get the initial pilings in the ground, there was a plan from the very start to revegetate that. That charge was led by John Kinney, who is able, and we have already started that replanting installed additional bushes, natural growing habitat that'll come back in there. So yes, it's disturbing to have to remove something to rebuild, but in this case, it was as minimal as we felt was necessary to get the work done. And we are in the process of revegetating. Much has already been done. And we have a watering system on that so that we can ensure that it continues to grow and develop and provide the flora fauna we are naturally used to in that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want more?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Hey, Pam.
yes,
Hang on
Pam?
1 second.
Uh,
Yeah, let me just add to that. This is John Kenny. We have done an initial installation of native plants to replace what was taken out. And I would just note that we are going to do at least 50% more than what has been done there once Duke has finished and once construction is complete on the overlook. So if you go by there, you'll see plants that have been planted off to the right. We will do a good bit more than that before we're completely finished, just so you know.
okay, so we have 3 hands raised. The next in line is Mark Dellosso. And again, we'll start the timer for 3 minutes for your question or comment. Please tell us your name and your Bald Head Island address. And I have allowed you to talk. You can unmute yourself, Mark.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mark Dellosso. We live at 19 Bay Tree Trail. First, I want to thank the committee. I am truly impressed with the amount of homework you've done and all the information you've given us. It's obvious you've put a lot of work into this. So I had a couple of questions, one of which was answered. Here's my only question. The old overlook over the past several years, especially in the summer, has become a hangout for the younger generation and feeding the alligators at night. What consideration or what are we doing to prevent that? We live fairly close and that has always been sort of a dangerous situation. We go by at night and we see a bunch of, young people hanging there and you kind of worry about them falling in or the alligator jumping out or, what are we doing about that?
Thank you, Mark. One, thank you for your kind comments initially. I appreciate that. And I'm going to ask John Fisher, who is continuing to daily be in charge of the completion of this project, along with John Kenny. But I think John Fisher will address your question.
Okay, again, John Fisher, thank you so much. That's a very, very good question and one that's been in consideration the entire time. As you listen to Alan's presentation, the board from its onset to rebuild this was very, very concerned about the safety of not only the folks and the visitors and so forth on the island, but also safety of the wildlife that is protected around that particular location. Even prior to the rebuild being necessary, in 2018, as Alan alluded to in his presentation, we were made aware of the unnatural behavior of alligators when we did bring out the wildlife staff. We brought in the conservancy, public safety, etc. At that point, we realized and knew these were unlearned behaviors. The alligators obviously were being enticed or encouraged to come up and make their appearances. That involved us making a decision to put fencing up and to try to minimize or mitigate some of that situation at the time. Once Florence took this overlook out and we went back to the drawing board with the unanimous approval of the membership present to rebuild this, it is a very popular area and we're going to be very proud of it when it's completed. The safety aspect and the design went through several renditions. The initial design we came up with was somewhat of a cantilevered and extended platform with edges pulled back to keep you or discourage overhanging or leaning over or the ability to toss something in easily. After further design and pulling in the architect, Gordon Hall, and also pulling in the engineer and the safety being paramount here, the final design has a cantilever section. It is a platform that is built, and once you see or look at this design, the specifications of it, etc., it is designed to totally minimize the opportunity or the encouragement of anyone trying to entice or feed the wildlife to get them to come up and show themselves. That was of an ultimate piece of our decision-making process, and the architect drawing, designing, engineering, etc. You will notice also when this is completed, we totally pulled all of the pilings out of the water, pulled them back to dry surface to insert them in the ground, and reduce the overhang edge to prevent people from getting out that far. It's like any habitat that you go to. If you go to a zoo, someone still wants to violate and reach in and touch the gorilla if they can. In this case, we're doing everything we possibly can, and it was utmost importance to study, look at, and you heard that Gordon brought into us many designs of wildlife overlook type structures, etc., that he reviewed, he sought the engineering for, etc. So we feel comfortable as a board that this is the safest design that could be put together for this particular overlook. And we have confidence that it will make a tremendous difference in the amount of teasing or perhaps instigation of trying to get the wildlife to come up. So we're confident in the design that it's much better than we've had in the past, and it will be a deterrent to trying to do such behavior. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, John. Good answer.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So we have 2 remaining hands raised, and again, 3-minute timer, and please introduce yourself. The next person is Nancy Lane, and I've allowed you to talk if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Nancy Lane. I'm an owner and resident, not full-time, of Timber Creek 7B. I've been coming to the island since 1974. Wow. And an owner since the early 90s. And I first want to say how much I appreciate the incredible volunteer work that goes into everything the association does. I hopefully have a quick question. In dealing with the current environment of increasing costs for materials, do we have a fixed price on materials in this contract, or are we still at risk of an escalation on material costs?
Thank you for your question, Nancy. And again, I will ask John Fisher to respond to this question.
Nancy, very good question. Yes, we're all aware of the spiraling cost of lumber. It's not standing timber, it's the demand for lumber. We realize if you follow any information about the history of pricing in lumber and building products these days, timber or lumber itself is up 300+% in the last year and a half. To answer your question specifically, the materials have already been purchased, bought, and are on the ground being installed right now for this project. The high expense was not necessarily the timber, it was the fact that our specifications called for stainless steel brackets, stainless steel bolts, not plated, not inferior type product of any way. We did not want to bar the expense of building material in line of safety and for longevity of this particular overlook and scenic area. So to answer your question, the materials have already been purchased, accounted for, etc., and they are being assembled at this time. So thank goodness we feel like we beat most of the curve on that timber increase in getting this product on site and now being installed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 1 remaining hand raised, and let's see, again, the 3-minute timer, and please introduce yourself, and I am going to allow you to talk, and this is Wayne Lambert. Okay, you're on. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you. Please go ahead.
I have a couple of things to say. First of all, I agree that this process was flawed from the very beginning. When I got a call, it was not from John Fisher. He never talked to me or discussed with me anything about bidding on this process until it was already done. I did have a video with Gordon Hall, and I would like to say between he and Kerry, Both of them were untruthful with me during the video. Both of them admitted that the plans were not complete, that I brought out many points that were not complete and couldn't be priced. I was told during the video that I would get a completed, updated set of plans within 3 to 5 days. This did not happen. And the next thing I heard, this contract was given to someone else, and I was never given the completed plans. I would like to say, I would like to have seen the completed plans before we got to the process we are in now. And besides that, I have very little to say about this. I worked on this for 3,000. Cost of the material for this job was $98,000 in my bid, and I was donating all the labor. And that's where it is, and I stand by it. I've done 3,000 projects and estimates. I think I know what I'm talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. I appreciate all you've done for us, and I appreciate your comments today.
Okay, looks like we have one additional hand raised. So let's see. And again, the 3-minute timer will start, and please introduce yourself. And this is Kit Adcock, and I have allowed you to speak, and you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. As you all know, Bald Head Association is near and dear to my heart, and I do appreciate the tremendous amount of work and effort that y'all put into managing this increasingly larger and more complex organization. My one comment has to do with the primary focus of the association, which is to improve and enhance the property values of the homeowners. And I am horrified by the expansion of the scope of this project because of its impact on one of the property owners. And I do believe that the fact that it has been expanded is going to increase the opportunity for teenagers to gather at this spot, which is not going to only be a visual issue for the residents at the corner of Bay Tree Trail and Steve Bonnet, but also a noise issue. And I just want to be sure that foremost in everyone's minds on the board is that the goal of maintaining and improving the property values is the primary consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your fine comments, Kit, and thank you for your many years of great contribution to Bald Head Association and the island as a whole. Are there any other questions?
I do see one new hand raised, Alan, and let's see, this is Laurie Jelinek, and I will allow you to talk. Again, the 3-minute timer, please introduce yourself. You can unmute yourself and let us know where you live on Bald Head Island.
Yes, this is Laurie Jelinek. Thank you for taking my question. I live at 18 Cedar Court, and my husband John and I are both full-time residents and have been for over 10 years. My question is relative to the noise, the teenagers gathering as a gathering spot. Are there going to be listed hours? I know that may not deter many people, but you go to a lot of state parks, national parks. They have hours of operation, sunrise to sundown. And so I was wondering if there are going to be any hours listed or published, as well as will public safety be making regular patrols past the overlook during the day, evenings, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Again, I will ask John Fisher to respond to your fine question.
Laurie, thanks for your concern and interest there. We all share the same concern about the use of this. We don't want to create what might be referred to as an attractive nuisance that would attract and cause teenagers to hang out, or any adult or any child or anyone to hang out. Your suggestion about posted hours of operation is a good one, and something we will certainly take into consideration as a board. To answer specifically about public safety, I've had numerous conversations, not one, not two, but numerous conversations through this process of patrolling and watching and keeping an eye on that overlook. There was a similar situation at Beach Access 42 many years ago before, excuse me, that we asked public safety to make regular patrols and stop by. That in itself cured and created the existence that teenagers, et cetera, were not going to be allowed to just hang out and party at a particular location. They need to go meet in open or public type areas, and not something that is meant for normal type hours, et cetera. So yes, we have asked public safety. They are aware and do continue to patrol on a very regular basis. They do night patrols as well. And this is a situation that we will again remind them once more that we ask them to make regular routine patrols as they already do, that we don't have a situation. And should one occur, any neighbors or surrounding or folks passing by that might see that, we would suggest you do call in and ask the public safety folks to make a run by there if you think that's necessary. But your suggestion about hours of operation is a good one, and we will certainly take that in consideration as a board. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Are there any other questions?
So that's it, Alan. There are no more hands raised.
Okay, well, thank you all for attending. We appreciate your participation in Bald Head Association, and anything we could do to help, always feel free to call on us. Thank you.